Hello, everybody. My name is Anand Batmas from Simon Fraser University, School of Interactive Arts and Technology. Today, I'm going to be the session chair of the session 9, 3D user interfaces and manipulation. We have 5 papers today. One of them is a journal paper, and the 4 of them are going to be conference paper. If you have any questions about the papers, that you can either use Slack channel for all the attendees, and that if you are watching from the Twitch, you can use Slido. I think that we're gonna also add the link for the Slido link to our Twitch channel, so that you can use it to ask questions to presenters. So I would like to start with our first presenter, Alexander Kulik from Bauhaus Universität Weimar, and he is going to present on motor performance in virtual 3D object manipulation.
So may I take over?
Yeah, you can take over.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. And hello, everybody. Welcome to this talk on motor performance in virtual 3D object manipulation. I hope you can all hear me well. So if not, please tell me. So we believe that 3D user interfaces can be way more expressive than their 2D counterpart. But unfortunately, this expressivity is rarely unleashed. Or we could put that question in a different way. Why do 3D artists predominantly work with 2D desktop interfaces? Well, some prior research indicates that even just placing 3D objects in an immersive virtual environment might simply take too long. Studies on this issue typically employ 3D docking tasks, testing how long it takes to move a 3D object from one predefined 3D position and orientation to another. However, a typical research goal is to compare different interfaces and interaction techniques. However, the reported task completion times are often unconvincing. In Shai and Milgram's study from '98, for instance, participants improved their performance enormously during training, as you can see in this diagram, but eventually they settled on 7 seconds, which it took them to move an object from A to B. Later research often revealed even longer task completion times for virtual 3D object docking. So the question comes up, does it really take 7 seconds or even more to move an object from one place to another within arm's reach? And what does it mean if one condition compared to be significantly better than another, but it still required 10 seconds or more to move that virtual object? How can we even know in such cases that baseline conditions have been implemented good enough? Some researchers even argue that 3D object manipulation is generally less efficient than its 2D counterpart. For example, Berard and colleagues demonstrated that even with a stereo display, users did not perform much faster with a 3D tracked wand compared to a 2D mouse interface, but they made far more errors. So we identified 3 major problems with the current approach to studies of user performance in 3D aimed movements. The tasks often involve hidden factors like cognitive processing, which may obscure the raw motor performance. The task parameters may simply be ill-suited for one or the other interface. For example, it might demand too much accuracy. And the benefits of simultaneous rotation and translation seem to be underused. Fitts' model of rapid aimed movements could help to cope with some of these issues in research. Fitts suggested a reciprocal target acquisition task which eliminates the cognitive effort of movement planning. Fitts' model also reflects the speed-accuracy trade-off. It predicts a linear relation of movement time to the index of difficulty, which can be considered a measure of relative accuracy. Thereby, the model facilitates the comparison of interfaces across different task requirements. For example, if the red and the blue line in this diagram were linear regressions derived from independent studies with 2 different interfaces X and Y, we could say that X has a higher constant overhead than Y, but also it is less affected by an increasing task difficulty. Even if only a single measure is available, a throughput can be computed that relates the task completion time to an index of difficulty. In that case, for example, it took twice as long to perform the task with X, but since the task difficulty was also more than 2 times higher, the throughputs are comparable for both interfaces. The applicability of Fitts' law to various types of aimed movements has often been demonstrated, including, of course, 3D pointing. In this case, throughput rates between 2 and 4 were typically observed. More recently, Stoelen and Akin compared 1D translation, 1D rotation, and their combination based on Fitts' popular model. They suggested to simply add the indices of difficulty of both sub-movements and obtained a good fit for this very simple model. However, the optimal balance between speed and accuracy differs between users and interfaces, and this may lead to a severe bias of predefined task difficulties. McKenzie and Isokowski, for example, showed that different movement strategies alone can lead to very different results. A proper analysis should thus take the movement time and the actual error distribution into account. And this is exactly the idea behind the computation of an effective index of difficulty. The actual movement endpoints typically form a normal distribution, and if we assume a successful task completion in 96% of all cases, hence a 4% error rate, an effective target width can be derived from the standard deviation of endpoints along the movement axis. The effective target distance is the mean distance between those endpoints. From these, we can derive an effective throughput, which proved to be more robust against different target acquisition strategies. Now, these prior research results motivated us to explore whether also 3D object manipulation with 6 degrees of freedom can be studied with Fitts' popular model of rapid aimed movements, and we set up the following experimental tasks: a pure 3D translation task, a pure 3D rotation task, and their combination in a docking task with 6 degrees of freedom. The tested conditions thus varied between the type of task and corresponding subtasks with 3 different translation distances and 3 different rotation distances. This resulted in 3 subtasks for rotation and translation, but 9 combinations thereof for the 3D docking condition. We also distinguished the type of target between the left one, which was always regularly oriented, and the right one, which had an uncommon or oblique orientation if rotation was involved. So participants were standing centrally in front of a back projection screen and a table of 1 meter height. The 3D input device was a wooden prop that could be comfortably held and turned between both target orientations with a single hand. A numpad on the table served to confirm target acquisitions by keystrokes with the other hand. The manipulation object, a light blue bar type 3D cell phone model, followed the 3D motion input at a fixed offset to avoid occlusion. We invited 21 students of our university via an online blackboard. They were instructed to find their optimal balance between speed and accuracy during training and then to maintain their strategies throughout the recorded study. A restaurant voucher worth €50 was awarded for the highest overall throughput. Well, we expected that motor performance in all 3 3D object manipulation tasks would follow Fitts' law, that simultaneous rotation and translation can be advantageous, and that the oblique target orientation would be harder to reach. So let's look at the results. Translation distance, here plotted in ascending order on the x-axis, did not affect the obtained translation errors, neither for the translation tasks shown in red, nor for the docking tasks shown in blue. Also, rotation errors were virtually unaffected by translation distance. As expected, we obtained a significant effect of translation distance on movement time. The situation looks a bit different for the effects of rotation distance. While translation errors remained unaffected, we see that an increasing rotation led to a lower rotation accuracy and also longer movement times, both in rotation tasks shown in green and in docking tasks shown in blue. The type of target had the largest effect. Both in rotation and docking tasks, we observed that rotational errors were about 1 degree larger on average if users tried to align with the oblique target orientation shown to the right of each pair. A similar effect could be observed on task completion times if the task involved rotation. The oblique target orientation took longer to reach. In the translation task instead, shown in red, it did not make much of a difference if the target was left or right. Nevertheless, we observed a significant higher translation accuracy for the oblique target orientation in the docking tasks. Users spent more time and apparently they were more successful to further minimize translational than rotational errors. I mentioned earlier that an effective target width can be derived from the standard deviation of endpoints along a single movement axis. To reflect the endpoint deviation in any direction, because we were doing 3D interactions, we compute the absolute distances of endpoints to the actual target. The resulting distribution is a half normal distribution, hence the root square must be used instead of the standard deviation to compute the effective target width. We did that and derived the corresponding indices of difficulty for each subtask and each user individually. The average effective target widths across all users and subtasks were about 2 centimeters for translation and about 13 degrees for rotations. A linear regression analysis indicates that all 3 types of 3D aimed movements follow Fitts' law. This allows to compare our data to results from prior research that also used Fitts' model. For example, the overall performance is in a similar range as reported by Stöhlen and Akin from their experiments on combined 1D rotation and translation. Also, the slope, in case of the 3D docking task, seems comparable to Fitts' disk transfer task. However, the high intercept indicates a constant overhead of about 1.5 seconds. We believe that the reason can be found in the relatively long closed loop phase, during which participants tried to achieve a more accurate placement, only relying on visual feedback. The throughput analysis enables a condensed presentation of the earlier shown effects on movement and on movement speed and accuracy. Our results in a range of 2 bits per second on average are on the lower end of previously obtained data. The oblique target orientation shown on the right side of each pair was clearly more difficult to reach. Most importantly, however, our results show that 3D docking is not as difficult as could be expected from prior research. Instead, combined rotation and translation seems to be beneficial. In summary, our research results demonstrate that 3D aimed movements, including 3D docking with 6 degrees of freedom, can be modeled by Fitts' law.
So I'm going to
direct
talking about
direct 3D object manipulation also seems to be competitive with other types of aimed movements. However, it should be noted that the overall throughput of direct 3D input seems to be 2 to 3 times lower than its more constrained 2D counterpart. We also showed clear benefits of combined rotation and translation, and we provide reference measures for a comfortably achievable movement accuracy. So how does direct 3D object manipulation compare to 2D interfaces for similar tasks? Well, with 2D interfaces, object manipulation must always be separated into subtask sequences with intermediate mode switching. In the case shown here, at least 3 independent aimed movements would be needed to move that yellow bunny to a new 3D target position indicated in blue. And it has not been turned yet, if also a different orientation would be required. With unconstrained 3D input, all of this can be done in a single move. This should be more effective even if the achievable throughput is only 1/3 of that known from mouse interfaces. The future research and development should find convincing ways to better exploit the high expressiveness of direct 3D manipulation for productivity applications. And I'm particularly interested to apply Fitts law as a research tool to study potential movement synergies in cooperative aimed movements. Thank you for your attention.
So thank you, Alex. Thanks for your presentation. First, I would like to check this Slido if we have any questions. Yes. So there's one question. How do you measure 3D rotation errors in one parameter since the difference of two 3D rotations is in SO3?
Pardon? Sorry,
how do you measure 2D rotation errors in one parameter since the difference of two 3D rotations is in SO3?
How we measure the difference in rotations? No.
Yeah, 3D rotations in two 3D rotations.
Well, we basically just I don't know. I don't quite get the question. So we measure.
So you rotate this object in 3 degrees of freedom that you rotate in each different axis, right?
So, no, but I mean you're turning the object around one axis that is simply an axis in 3D space.
Okay, so that you are
right. So like a quaternion expresses an axis and a rotation angle around it, and that's also how we also conceptualize rotations ourselves.
Okay.
So we do not distinguish the different Euclidean rotation angles, but we simply take the rotation angle and the rotation axis that might be different.
Okay. There's no questions from Slack and there's no questions in the Zoom, I think. So I have two questions. So that in your presentation, you said that you asked subjects that you wanted to increase the throughput performance of the users. Why did you encourage users for this? Like, why did you want to encourage users to improve their throughput performance, and how did you explain the throughput? I mean, did you say that you have to be really fast, or you have to be fast and precise? How did you say that?
Well, that's a very good question. Well, one of the points is when we looked at prior research, we were really puzzled that it often takes so long to do these 3D docking tasks, and I believe that one of the reasons is that the accuracy, the required accuracy, is predefined, and it's often too high.
Hello everyone,
for what people can
I am Qin
So we
from
didn't
University.
Specify that, but we basically said to people, well, try to be as accurate as it makes sense for you while still maintaining a reasonable speed. So we basically left two of these variables open to be for users to find their individual speed accuracy trade-off. And we wanted them to have an understanding of what they were doing. So we explained them the whole idea of Fitts law and how this throughput is computed beforehand. And since they were university students, I would say they understood it, and or I'm very positive that they understood it, and that they on that basis they tried to find the optimal trade-off, which also meant they didn't just try to be as fast as possible, but they knew, well, if I try to be too fast, then I will be too inaccurate. So if you think about a real-world application, also users will need to find their individual optimum, right? They will find like if you're operating your mouse, you also need to figure out how accurate you want to work, and from at what point you want the application to snap, for example.
Okay, there is a follow-up question about the previous question about the 3D rotation errors. That it says the quaternion has 4 parameters. Again, that how I think it's still not clear how did you measure this 3D rotation errors.
Okay, I mean, we only looked at so we have target orientation, and from that target orientation, we can measure a difference, which has an axis, that's true, but it also has an angle, and we were only interested in how far away it is from the optimal orientation. So we were not interested in the angle, so in the direction of the error. But that's why we only considered the absolute rotational error.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Alex. That I have one more question, but I will ask this later on because we don't have I want to continue with our next speaker. So we're gonna have a 30 seconds break, and when we make the transition. So thank you very much again, Alex. And
thank you.
We're gonna be again live with our next presentation.
Okay.
So hello everybody again. Now we are going to have our second presentation, transfer of coordination skill to unpracticed hand in immersive environments, from Shan Xiao from Xinan University, from China, but he is currently not with us here today. So we are going to play his pre-recorded video, and we are going to skip the questions and answers section for this presentation. But I think you can reach him with the contact information.
Everyone, I am Jinyi Long from Jinan University in China. Today, I would like to present our recent work. This work is about transfer of coordination skill to the unpracticed hand in immersive environments. Most of our daily tasks involve coordinating movements between the arms, including driving a car, typing on a computer keyboard, using a fork and a knife, opening a jar of jam, and so on. All of these activities the interlimb coordination is essential. However, the joke can cause muscle weakness or stiffness down one side of upper extremity, which leads to disruption of interlimb coordination. Bimanual training is a common strategy to facilitate muscle activation on the patellar side after the stroke. However, this entrainment will involve long-term and fluent practice. Also, the common training strategies can not always be efficacious for the bimanual therapies. VR theater has become increasingly important in the area of motor task learning and rehabilitation. This is because the VR has some potential advantages, like task automation, scalability of motor and cognitive challenge, performance tracking, practice, and safe virtual environment, gamification of exercises. Also an infinite range of possibilities for design of virtual spaces. A growing body of evidence exists to support the effectiveness of VR systems for motor learning, with a special focus on motion capturing and rendering, or game-based VR interventions to improve upper extremity motor function following a stroke. However, little is known about the effects of unilateral training on the enhancement of learning or by manual coordinated tasks through the VR environment. To establish or by manual movement task learning system that facilitate the coordination of the unpracticed limb with the practiced, we create a game-like scenario system. In summary, our contributions are that we systematically investigate the effects of visualizations on bimanual interaction training. We also provide results indicating that higher fidelity hand representations positively affect the performance in the unimanual task and bimanual visualization. Here's the related works. We will first introduce the intermanual transfer. Intermanual transfer is the process whereby initial practice of a unilateral motor task with one hand gives rise to an improvement in subsequent performance with the unpracticed hand. Unilateral strength training gives rise to enhanced performance of the same task by the untrained opposite limb for multiple motor tasks. Inspired by the work of Marshall and Smith, in which they compare the effectiveness of virtual and traditional physical training transfer of bimanual assembly motor tasks, and demonstrated the validity of VR systems in training. Here we developed a VR system for bimanual training that enables one hand coordinate with an offender hand to accomplish a bilateral task in a 3D VR environment, as if both their hands activated together. The main purpose of this research is to verify whether the unilateral training with visual feedback in VR environments is sufficient for effective transfer of bimanual coordinated skill to the unpracticed hand. Okay, here is the methods. There are 48 right-hand healthy volunteers in the study. This figure shows the experimental setup. The participant sits in front of a desk, and the virtual environment is basically congruent with the real environment, such as one headset and the motion sensitives allows, and receive the visual feedback of virtual hands. This is the stimulus set. The shape of stimuli for each hand was a three-sided square, with the open side facing up, right, down, or left. Okay, here is the symmetrical illustration of one trial during a bimanual drawing task. During the experiment, two circles were presented to indicate the starting of each trial. These two starting circles are located in front of the participant. The participant was required to move and maintain their hands into the starting circle for 1 second. Then, a fixation point was displayed in the center of the starting circles. At this stage, the participants were also instructed to maintain the starting position. The participant was then presented with the target pattern, appear as two white three-sided squares, which serve as the imperative signal. Each experimental condition comprised 3 stages: pre-training, training, and post-training. In this study, there are 2 experiments. Here, we will introduce the first experiment. Between subjects, we decided were used to explore the effects of visual feedback of Van der Ham on the transfer of coordinate skill. Okay, we decided 4 different training conditions. The first one is the BH, training with both hands while receiving their online visual feedback. The second one is the IH, training with right hand while receiving online visual feedback as if both hands join. The third one is the IH, training with right hand while receiving each online visual feedback as if only the right hand join with the left hand static. The fourth one is the no HBH, training with no actual movements, but with the online visual feedback of drawing by Avena only. The second experiment. The second experiment is used to explore the effects of virtual hand representations during the IHBH condition. There are 3 virtual hand representations. One is realistic, the second one is iconic, the third one is abstract. The performance measures. First is the intra-hand temporal measure, like the reaction time, total time, and then is the inter-hand temporal measure, like the temporal coupling. The third one is intra-hand spatial measure, and the last one is the inter-hand spatial measure. Okay, here we will show the results in experiment 1. First one is the intra-hand temporal measure. From this figure, we can see that the performance gains in initiating and planning their movements and in completing the joints were enhanced over training with BH, IH compared to the IH, and no H and BH. This slide shows the results about the interhand temporal measure. From the fingers, we can see that the drawing motions of the both hands became substantially synchronized after training in the BH and RHBH, but not the other conditions. This slide shows the intra-hand spatial deviation results for the unpracticed hand. Also, when we look at the finger, we can see that the participants perform better for handling transitions during drawing over training with BH, also the IHBH, but not the other training strategies. This slide show the interhand spatial deviation results. From the fingers, you can see here, okay? This result show that the spatial interference between the unpracticed hand and practiced hand could be eliminated over training with the BH and IHBH. Also, this intra-hand, okay, this is the result for experiment 2. First is the intra-hand temporal measure. For the finger, from the finger, we can see that the performance gains in the planning time and total time for drawing were enhanced with increasing level of realization of virtual hand representation. Also, the interhand temporal measure is the drawing motions of the 2 hands could substantially synchronize after training with the more realization representation of virtual hands. This slide is about the intra-hand spatial deviation results for unpracticed hand. Note that the participants perform better for handling transitions during drawing, with increasing realization representations of virtual hands. Also, is for the in-the-hand spatial variation results. Okay, the performance or increasing realization with increasing realization representations of virtual hands. A discussion. So, from our observation that no significant performance gains were obtained in the coordination skill after observation of drawings by the offender, we can speculate that this observation may accelerate the learning process of coordination skill, but not acquire coordination skill directly. Okay, this is the conclusions of our work. We demonstrate that performing and seeing a bimanual task, or performing a unimanual task and seeing a bimanual action, are better than performing and seeing a unimanual task, or not performing a task and seeing a bimanual action. The second experiment provides results indicating that higher fidelity hand representations positively affect performance in the unimanual task and bimanual visualization. Okay, thank you for your interest. I also would like to thank my co-authors. Okay, thanks.
Okay, again, I'm sorry for that this presentation that we don't have the speaker today. If you have any questions, you can reach the presenter and ask the questions directly. Now, again, that we will give a 30 seconds break, and then we will continue with our next presentation. So our next presentation is called Precise and Realistic Grasping and Manipulation in Virtual Reality Without Force Feedback. Our presenter, Thibault Delvaux, is not here today with us. So we are going to play his pre-recorded video. And again, if you want to ask questions, you can reach the presenter online.
Grasping and manipulation in virtual reality without force feedback. So, along with the development of affordable virtual reality, but also augmented reality technology, some complex applications like remote operation, entertainment industry have emerged. Hence, the realism of the virtual environment as well as the user's interaction with the virtual element are key aspects to cover in order to ensure an immersive and efficient user experience. Nowadays, some handheld controllers are provided with the most famous device like HTC Vive or Oculus Rift. But there are also force feedback glove system, which provide a feeling of the the feeling of the object, the sensation of the haptic sensation of the object. So now the users can feel the object, and so the users could adapt to the object shape in order to perform grasping and manipulation tasks which are more robust to disturbances bring to the object, and could perform really precise grasping tasks like manipulating tiny objects or perform complex manipulation. However, these devices are expensive and they are more intrusive, like a tracking system. Another way, there exist affordable and unintrusive devices which just track the end in the space, which could perform grasping and manipulation without force feedback. There are the lip motion controller and the Manus VR Glove, for instance, but also recently the Oculus hand tracking system, which provide an accurately hand tracking in the environment. However, this system can't provide the feeling of the object, the haptic feeling of the object. In that sense, fingers couldn't adapt to the object's shape, and so couldn't perform effectively manipulation tasks. In particular, there are the prices task, grasping task. According to Kutkowski, there are two main grasping type that human could perform. The power grasp, which are the known grasp types, and which consist on make an 100 grasping in the full of the hand. But there are also precision grasping type, like grasp tiny objects or pencil, or just object who could be have a manipulation which could be precise. So according to Kutkowski, the attributes of this precise grasping type is the dexterity. In order to have a high degree of freedom between the object and the hand, so the user could perform a grasping that permits to move the object relatively to the palm, the hand palms. But there are also another attributes, which are precision. So the grasping have to apply wrench to the object accurately in any direction. And there are also the compliance, which consists of resisting of disturbance applied to the object in any direction. So the grasp configuration, like precision tasks, have to perform these three attributes. In order to perform precise grasp without force feedback in virtual reality, we need to allow some degree of freedom between the ball and the object during the manipulation. But also we need to robustify the grasping by preventing the grasp to resist to any disturbance coming from any direction. Also, these grasps need to be realistic in order to improve the immersion of the user. The first approach, called metaphor-based approach, is related to the human-computer interface domain. This consists in selecting, manipulating metaphor where a set of simple hand gesture control the object properties such as position, rotation, and event size. There are several works in literature about that, like the bare hands approach or the key tap gesture approach, which triggers some interaction. But this is an interesting approach because this is an ergonomic and intuitive approach with no computational costs, and this is also robust to any disturbance during the manipulation. But however, this is a non-realistic rendering approach. This is unnatural during the manipulation, and that this affects the immersion of the users. The second approach, main approach, is more related to the simulation domain. This is an approach which consists of simulates the human skin as a soft body in interaction with the objects. In that sense, we need to make an optimization of the virtual mesh of the finger and their deformation during the manipulation. In fact, this is a really realistic rendering because it's more near to the natural way of manipulate. But this is an approach which have a huge cost of huge computational cost, and which couldn't be online during the simulation, even if we need to simplify the modelization of the skin model. And in fact, this decrease the robustness to French disturbance applied to the object during the manipulation. The other and last approach, which is also a physics-based manipulation approach, is the virtual coupling approach, which consists of manipulate a virtual hand which is coupled by virtual springs with the real hand. So during the manipulation, the hand could be compliant during the and to adapt to the object shape, but also she generates some non-desired branch during the coupling. So this is a really balanced approach, because this is an approach which have no huge computational cost. This is more realistic than a metaphor-based approach, and which is also, however, non-robust to disturbance when the object is manipulated. We will further treat these limits of this approach, but because this approach is more balanced between the pros and cons of the purpose to manipulating well objects, we decided to choose this approach and to solve the non-robust to disturbances approach. In that sense, we decided to choose the virtual coupling approach by setting up a lip motion on hand-mounted mode on a headset vice. So as we can see, this is our setup. So as we said before, this approach, the virtual coupling one, have several problems we have to solve. The first is the gap between the real hand and the virtual one, which is on our interaction with the environment. During the manipulation, the real hand could be in interpenetration for normal or just huge objects, but this could be imply realizing effects for tiny objects. So we have to solve that. As we can see, we just illustrated this by this short video. This gap between the real end and the virtual one could imply some disturbances during the manipulation if the grasp is not good, or if the gap is so huge that the effort resulted are very important and are unstable. In order to prevent that, we decide to stick the finger by apply virtual spring between the finger of the object during the manipulation when we detect one. As we can see, the first phase is the grasping phase. When we trigger a good grasping by using grasping criteria, and we detect a good one, we activate this spring. Once the spring is activated, we could manipulate whatever in any direction we want. For releasing the object, we had to just release. We just analyze the output of the effort along the normal of the contact points. Once we reach a certain forced result, we deactivate this spring and the object could be released. How is CASI? Firstly, without the grasping assistance, the grasp is really unstable to disturbances bringing by the inertial effect on the object. This is especially more important, more unstable with small objects. With the assistance, we could see the relative efficiency of the grasping assistant. I just want to notify that the grasping criteria used to trigger this grasping assistant is provided from robotics literature. This is a compromise between some other grasp criteria, but which are really huge computational needed, and other grasp criteria, but which are just simple geometrical computing. This grasp criteria, however, depends on the nature of the object, his shape, his dimension, and the contact points, the environment of the contact point. We demonstrate the qualitative performance of our approach by conducting a within-subject experiment, which compare grasping and manipulation of three kinds of objects of three different sizes. The first is a small object, cylindrical and cubic object, the flat one, and the slim one. The result experiment consists of a pick-and-place task for these objects, which are decomposed of three phases. The manipulation phase, when the subject starts with the appearance of the objects and is associated target. The subject has to bring this object to the target. After that, the second phase, the maintaining one. Once the target is triggered, participants have to maintain the target position during 1 second. The target becomes opaque blue after that. And after this phase, the subject had to release the object. We just record the manipulation time phase, the error in translation in rotation during the maintaining phase, and the number of attempts for each object. We made these experiments fourth time for each object, 2 times with assistance and 2 times without assistance. After each manipulation, we ask a subject two questions. One is naturalness, how natural the sensation of the average pick and place experience was, from 0 to 10, and the efficiency, how the efficiency of the average pick and place experience was, from 0 to 10. As we can see, there are significant results for the both aspects of the user study. First of all, for the quantitative results, we can see that the number of manipulation attempts is really significant between without and with assistance. In fact, I choose hard objects to grasp in virtual reality in order to highlight these aspects. For the other aspect, like the error, this is not so significant, even if for flat object, like we can see for manipulation time. For the qualitative results, we can see a significant impact of the grasping assistance in the efficiency and naturalness feeling of the users. In fact, I choose really hard to grasp objects in order to highlight the high relief bringing by the grasping assistance, which brings the feeling to grasp normally an object.
So, as I said earlier, that we don't have our presenter with us today. So, if you want to ask questions, you can reach him with his question for his questions. So, for our next presentation, that we're gonna give again a 30-second break, and then we will continue with our presentations. So our next presenter is Kan, and she is going to present work disambiguation techniques for freehand object manipulations. A comparative analysis of 3D user interaction, how to move virtual objects in mixed reality.
Okay, can you see the screen? I started the screen sharing and I'm not really quite sure. So this one, I started sharing this.
Yes, now we can see your screen, yes.
Oh, okay, you can see my screen, got it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, then I'm just going to, where does it go? Presenter view. Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Kang, and I'm assistant professor at University of Florida. This work is based on my PhD thesis. And topic I'll to discuss today is how to move virtual object in mixed reality. So as you all know, Oculus recently released hand tracking SDK. And as opposed to holding a handheld controller, integrating hand tracking eliminates the need for carrying additional devices, making our hand very appealing input device for many VR and MR headset. And many people believe using our hand can be natural and intuitive way to interact with 3D object. But the question remains here, then what kind of hand interaction? What kind of hand gesture? I'm actually asking a question to you guys right now. Well, when I ask this question, like how would you move this chair using your hand? When I ask this question to my 40 of my students, about 20% of the answer that they are going to use a pointing gesture, and about 10% said they are going to use a grabbing gesture, and some of students said they are going to use both hands. The thing is, our hands are capable of so many different gestures. So the idea of a natural and intuitive interaction can really vary based on by the different individuals. Gesture interaction has been popular research topic in 3D UI research. Prior work has looked into finger pointing and how we can accurately detect our finger pointing gesture, and multimodal interaction in order to increase accuracy in regard of selecting and manipulating object. Research have looking into combining with eye gaze or head positioning. And they're having a lot of research that actually compare different interaction styles. Although these studies provide valuable insight into understanding gesture interaction, prior research are heavily geared toward pattern recognitions or looking at the accuracy and efficiency. So the question of what is intuitive interaction, what is natural interaction using our hand, still remain as open question. To this end, in our study, we try to compare 3 different interaction styles. The one that uses your gaze as a gaze cursor and use a pinch position to move the object, and the one where you just directly walk to the object and touch and grab it to move this. And third, word in miniature, where the miniature object is presented to the user and user can manipulate the miniature size object. The reason we decide to choose these 3 interaction styles is based on its popularity and relative advantage and disadvantage each interaction provides. For example, gaze and pinch interaction is one of the most popular used interaction for mixed reality headset. And clear advantage this provides is it enables user to manipulate the remote object, and it also deals with the limited field of view issues. However, one of the concerns about this, because you are not really directly touching or interacting with the object, this may feel less natural compared to the next one, touch and grab interaction, which is another popular interaction designed for VR. Here, the disadvantage is that you cannot really interact with the remote object that is beyond your arm's length. This is why we look into the word in miniature interaction that actually combines the advantage of both features. You can still interact directly with this tiny object, and you can interact with the remote object by manipulating this miniature size one. Of course, there are other interactions such as go-go technique or other ray casting technique, but we decide to focus on the word in miniature based on its growing popularity in many VR applications, many VR architecture applications. Because what we were interested in was intuitive, natural hand gesture, our main focus of our research was discoverability, meaning that whether people will be able to discover all these features without having any instruction. And we also measure perceived level of naturalism and usability using questionnaire. And we're also looking at the accuracy and efficiency of each different 3 interaction among these 3 interaction styles. Method. For the device setup, we use Gem Mini and Leap Motion. The reason we decide to use Oculus and Gem Mini and not HoloLens is because the small field of view that HoloLens provide. And because our target product was furniture, it was important for us that user could see the entire size of the object, or like big table or large chair. That is why we decided to go for Gem Mini. And this is a video clip that shows how gaze and pinch interaction works. Oh. I think it stopped somewhere. I'm just going to replay this. So basically you use a gaze cursor to select the object and hold a pinch gesture. And for a touch and grab, you just directly touch in and grab it and place it where you want to place them. And the word in miniature, you have to scan the environment first so that miniature, kind of plane comes out. Then you can select this tiny object in order to manipulate the big size object. In order to test discoverability and perceive the usability and everything, we conduct a user study with the 21 participants. And because we were interested in the preferences, we conducted a study with the within subject design. We asked them to experience all these three interactions in a randomized order in order to minimize the order effect. And we gave them 3 different tasks. The first task was to select the menu. Here, they're selecting a chair they want to choose. And the second task is to move the chair to the designated area. And because the goal of doing task 1 and 2 was to looking into discoverability, we didn't really give any instruction for this. And then after we gave them instruction, we were interested in accuracy and efficiency of each different interaction style. So we asked them to arrange the 4 different chairs around the table so that it's perpendicular to each other. And toward the end, we gave them a survey questionnaire that asked about usability and perceived naturalism and enjoyment. These tasks were repeated for interaction 2, interaction 3, and at the end we asked them about their experiences by follow-up interview question. Because we were interested in the gesture, this entire session was recorded. Result. With respect to discoverability, we found that gaze and pinch interaction took most time to figure out without an instruction for selecting the menu and for moving the object. And after we gave them an instruction how to interact with the gaze pinch interaction or wording miniature interaction or the touch and grab interaction, we were interested in accuracy and efficiency. In order to measure efficiency, we were looking at the total time to finish this task, arranging the table and chair. And in order to looking at the accuracy, we were looking at the angular differences. This is the result of the graph. So because word in miniature, you have a top view, meaning that you can see this tiny little object from the top. So it may be easier for user to understand the configuration and the arrangement of the furniture, which is represented in this graph. It was more accurate. The word in miniature was more accurate, and it was significantly took less time for people to finish the task. When it comes to usability, the gaze and pinch interaction took much more effort, and people found that this is more frustrating than the other two. Our main focus of the study was the gesture. So we analyzed the gesture, what kind of gesture people were trying to use when they had no any instruction. So as you can see in this video clip, a lot of people were trying to use a pointing gesture. And they are trying to point, like press the button. Because we conducted a study with a novice VR MR user, meaning that they didn't have any experiences with MR headset, they didn't understand the idea of the gaze cursor very well. And when it comes to the moving object, they were supposed to either use a gaze and pinch interaction, holding a pinch gesture to move the object, or just using this grabbing gesture. However, these are the participants' first responses. We found that many of them are trying to use both hands. And another frequent gesture that was frequently used by the respondent was that using a pushing gesture. Like you can see their frustration here, probably. So basically we analyzed like what kind of gesture they were trying to use, how many hands they were trying to use, whether they were using finger pointing or lifting. And what we found out was that, to summarize entire gesture analysis, is that compared to the pinch gesture, the most frequently used gesture was finger pointing when it comes to menu selection. And the grabbing was less frequently used when it comes to moving a chair. A lot of people were trying to use a lifting gesture or push gesture. And compared to even a chair, when it comes to larger objects such as large table, the grabbing gesture was rarely used. 88 participants were trying to lift this table with both hands. In our follow-up interview, one of the frequently mentioned themes was the natural interaction. To quote one of the respondents' responses that even if it's not real, you think it's furniture, it feels like it should be heavy and you should be using both hands. And you don't really grab the table. That's not how you move the table in the real world. When you see a table like this, you try to lift this. And another frequently mentioned theme was dynamic nature of natural interaction. One respondent said that he hopes there should be more he can do, like you can pull, push, lift, basically do everything that you can do with the real chair and real table. Or just combine all these 3 different designs somehow and give option to choose. What we also found out was that many people prefer having a direct interaction, like directly touching it or clicking it. And they don't really mind walking around because we conducted a study in the room size environment. They much prefer walking around and picking up the item instead of using a remote interaction. And this interview and gesture analysis provide 3 different interaction design implications. First, natural interaction is dynamic and complex. A lot of designers are striving to develop one simple interaction that can work across many different platforms, using a gaze as a cursor, using a pinch gesture as clicking. But what we found out was that people much prefer interaction that is more complicated, just as how we interact with the actual object. And natural interaction is more direct and physical, meaning that compared to the cases where the objects were displayed far away from the user prefer interaction where they can actually manipulating this. And our study also point out to the critical roles of visual cues and affordance. Affordance is a popular research topic in HCI and 3D UI research, but not many current VR applications actually incorporate the idea of the visual affordance into designing 3D UI. One quick solution could be creating the realistic physics system. Like if we can create a realistic mesh collider, that would be great. But as you may already know, the current Unity 3D or Unreal game engine does not really support that great realistic physics system when it comes to creating 3D interaction for VR. So because my home department is digital art and science, my current research area is looking into visual guidance. How can we design a better visual feedback? Like instead of highlighting entire object, if we highlight only interactable parts or provide a gesture guidance, like this is the shape of the hand you should use, or providing visual clues such as arrow or movement box can be a simpler way to address this issue. There are limitations that should be pointed out in interpreting this study result. Because we were focusing on the discoverability, we didn't really look at the feature where once people had enough time to understand this interface feature, the result could be quite different. In the future study could look into the much longer learning curve and how the result could be different. And word in miniature was found to be a very effective and accurate way to interact with the object, but there are limitations when it comes to word in miniature, such as interacting with a dense environment. In the future study, we can explore how can we incorporate other features like zoom in or zoom out or ray casting in order to help how this word in miniature would work better in more challenging environment like a dense or occlusion. Because 3D interaction is complicated by its nature, there are so many gestures people can use, and rotating, scaling, and translating, there are a lot of other questions that should be answered. Our study could be the first step toward understanding what will be more intuitive and natural gesture to use when it comes to moving a 3D object in a room-size environment. Thank you for your attention. And
Okay, thank you, Khan. That was a really, really nice presentation with a really interesting work. I first want to check this Slido for questions. So there is no questions at this moment on Slido, and I just want to check the Slack if we have any questions. No. Oh, okay. Until that we have questions, I would like to ask a few questions about your work. So I think this, especially for the distal pointing in virtual and augmented reality, this is something not we are used to in real environment, in real world. And that is, there is a transition, there's a learning curve most of the time, the people to get used to this new gesture, such as the ray casting or the pinch method that you're using, or word in miniature. So, and you, in your work, that you also use a grabbing, that is the freehand, as a freehand.
Mm-hmm.
This is also used in the real world, so that you also compare the peripersonal space interaction with the distal pointing, with the distal interaction. So how is your work can be used for both the distal pointing and for distal interaction, also for the peripersonal space? That if you want to make a classification, how what would be your comment on it?
You mean the interaction when the object is like far distance from the user?
Yes, yes.
So that was actually the goal of our study. Like I thought, compared to grabbing gesture, word in miniature, or the gaze and pinch gesture like Microsoft HoloLens use, this could be the one that can be used for the distant interaction. So each three interaction has like different advantage and disadvantage, and the grabbing gesture could not have that feature. But what I found out was for the room size environment, just like regular size of your apartment, people actually preferred walking instead of picking up the item with a pinch gesture or using a ray casting. And of course, as you were mentioning, I think it's important to know that these were the people who never experienced this hand gesture interaction or VR. So once people actually get used to this, and once actually people understand all this feature, they may prefer other interaction like ray casting or go-go interaction. But for the first time user, what I found out was that they try to interact with the object as they would do in the real world. They walk instead of pointing this out.
Okay. Yeah. So that is, I think, so what would you think that if you increase the distance between the object and the object you want the subject to interact with, and within the subject, that is if it is the distance that is not reachable, like for 10 or 50 meters, how would you expect your results?
Then, of course, I think my result could be quite different. When I actually had a very similar study like that, I found that most frequent used gesture is actually pointing. So there should be, I think previous researcher already covered that issue, and there are other paper in this conference how to use a ray casting. I think it was like yesterday a presentation about the bubble method, which I thought was very, very like amazing. So I'm definitely interested in looking into that interaction, because I thought pointing would be the most intuitive way to interact, but I see that a lot of people were doing this or doing that. So I think our next presenter are going to talk about the ambiguity of our hand gesture. But if we can find out a way to incorporate this different ray casting technique into different gesture, because I don't think for this gesture, ray casting would be the best way to implement. So I think there can be a lot of interesting study that can be done, combining, people's discoverability and our existing technique to increase accuracy and everything.
Okay, thank you. So we have 3 questions from Slido. The first one is, did you try HoloLens 1 or 2 for any of the experiments? Also, which of the methods you described was more accurate?
So I didn't use HoloLens because HoloLens has small field of view, and our product was furniture, like large table. And you see that, I think if when you actually use a HoloLens, it has a small field of view, the item is kind of cut off. So that's why we use Gem Mini. It has a larger field of view. It's more like a video see-through of So I think I can show you in my slide somewhere here. Let's see, in my research method. So we, instead of using, HoloLens, we use Gemini. It's like a kind of video see-through camera that's attached to the Oculus Rift. Because, this is something that you are going to end up see if you are using HoloLens 1. And when I was conducting this study, HoloLens 2 was not ready yet.
Okay, the second question, I saw you look at how people interacted with the tables using the both hands, but did you analyze interactions with the chairs? Did they also use both hands, or does the perception of the object weights change the interaction methods?
That's a very interesting question, because what I found out very interesting was, I think it should be more clear in my paper. I don't remember accurate number, but more than like 70% of them are trying to use both hands for table, but not for chair. Because the table is a bigger and people think that should be more heavier, even though this is virtual object. So how we understand about actual, item that reflects what kind of gesture people are using. So which I actually found very interesting. For chair, I think the most frequent used gesture was actually pushing.
Okay, and the last question, did subjects had time to train the techniques?
Yes. So first we look at the discoverability, meaning that we didn't give any instruction. Then we gave the instruction so that they can have some, I think it was just 5 minutes to train themselves. Then we measure accuracy and efficiency.
Okay. And there's one more question, the last question. Do you think that users' preference of pointing to select objects from the menu would persist if the selection menu was out of arm's reach? Would it change the size of menu? Would it change with the size of menu?
I haven't thought about that, but I think that's really interesting point. Maybe the size of the menu is tiny, smaller. Maybe there should be different gesture they think could be more intuitive. What kind of gesture? I don't know. This, person who asked question are thinking about, but I think this is really interesting question. Maybe it depends on the size of the target. The gesture could be quite different.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you very much. Thanks, Khan. So we're going to give again a 30 seconds break, and we will go with our last presentation. So again, hey everybody, now we are going to have our last presentation. Laura is going to present her work, Disambiguation Techniques for Object Manipulations in Virtual Reality, from University of Toronto, Canada.
So hello everyone, hope you can all hear me. My name is Laura from the University of Toronto, and I'm here to present to you disambiguation techniques for freehand object manipulations in virtual reality. This work was done in collaboration with Professor Ravan Balakrishnan and Professor Toby Grossman. So first, let me talk to you about freehand interactions. Freehand interactions is a way for users to interact with virtual objects using their bare hands, similar to how they might interact with real-world objects, and the virtual object would have physically realistic reactions to the interaction. The concept of freehand interactions is especially promising for virtual and augmented reality because it feels natural and familiar to users, since we all have a lot of experience already with interacting with objects in our daily lives. And so we can rely more on our instincts and previous experiences instead of arbitrary commands or gestures when we're touching, holding, and playing with virtual objects. But one significant problem for freehand interactions is trying to deal with the ambiguity in the resulting outcome of the interaction. In real life, a lot of times one single gesture can mean a lot of things, and one action with your hands can be used to do different types of tasks. So for example, here, these pictures all show a polling gesture, but they're meant to do different things under different circumstances. And this is similar in VR and AR. You can use the same gesture to activate different operations on a virtual object, depending on the context, the object's properties, and the user's intentions with the object. So let's say we're in a shape modeling application and we see a globe like this. If we wanted to do something with this globe, maybe flatten it or stretch it, then maybe our first natural reaction would be to grab the globe and play around with it to see what would happen. Now, if we used our two hands to pull on the globe, should this globe be stretched like this? Or maybe should it be scaled? Or maybe open itself up? So the action is the same. In all three cases, we're pulling on the globe, but the resulting effect on the globe is different. And this is what we call operation ambiguity. Operation ambiguity from gestures is commonly seen in user-elicited gesture studies. For example, in a work called Magical Hands, the authors developed a system that uses user-elicited hand gestures to make animations in VR. So we can see here on the right side that one participant is using the motion of her hands to make a tornado animation and kind of turning her hands to indicate that the tornado should bend itself. And for these user-elicited gestures, sometimes the participants would use the same gestures to indicate different effects. So then how do we resolve operation ambiguity? Well, one straightforward way is to just map each gesture to a unique operation. But this method takes the naturalness away from gesture interactions, since the users are kind of forced to remember an arbitrary set of gesture commands to invoke the operations. And if the application is complex, then it would be hard to remember such a large number of commands. A cheat sheet that lists all the available commands would work, but it could be cumbersome and it's hard to find which gesture command mapping you're looking for. So we wanted to find a way to resolve the ambiguity while still keeping the benefits of freehand interactions. And we thought about what factors are important to consider when resolving the ambiguity. First of all, when the user is freely interacting with virtual objects, their hands are mostly already occupied with the object, and it might be hard to use hands to task switch between interacting with the object and disambiguating the operations. So we considered other input modalities that could be used for disambiguation. Here we focused on three modalities, which are gaze, speech, and foot tap. Also, it's not entirely clear when these ambiguity resolutions should happen. Initially, we thought that it made sense to resolve the ambiguity when the user is in the middle of performing a gesture on an object. So we thought to provide other options for the user to choose from during the interaction. But after looking at some related works, it seemed that providing these alternative options before the user begins their interaction, or maybe after they have completed their interaction, were also plausible designs that we could consider. And so we tested out three different timings at which the ambiguity is to be resolved. Some of the previous works that influenced our design considerations are previews, feed-forward and feedback mechanisms, and suggestive interfaces. Previews let users get a sense of what is the effect of applying a command before the command is actually called. Feed-forward and feedback mechanisms usually give immediate and continuous feedback during an interaction to show what has already been done and what's to follow. And suggestive interfaces, they first let the user give hints to the system about what the user wants to do, and then the system suggests possible operations that the user can select from. There were also other works on resolving input ambiguity in other areas of research like desktop interfaces, but the ambiguity that our work tried to address is in the intended outcome of performing identical gestures. Okay, so let's talk about the system that we developed and the disambiguation techniques in more details. We developed our system in a VR environment, which supports freehand interactions with 3D objects. We used Oculus Rift as the VR head-mounted display, and we attached a leap motion sensor at the center of the headset for hand tracking. And the application is ran on a Windows 10 machine. And in order to show what options are available to the user in the disambiguation process, we use a disambiguation menu, which shows 3 preview cubes. When the user's interaction with the object is ambiguous, this pop-up menu would appear above and at a distance from the object so that the user can choose the operation that they actually intended. And as I mentioned earlier, we explored 3 modalities that can be used to select the intended operation, which are gaze, speech, and foot tap. For gaze, we used head gaze. So in head gaze-based disambiguation, we have a circular cursor that follows the user's head direction. And if the cursor falls on one of the preview cubes and stays on the cube for more than 0.5 seconds, then that operation is selected. Speech selection works just like how you might expect it to work. We place the associated speech command above each preview cube, and the user can select an operation by speaking that command out loud. And for foot tap modality, the ground in front of the user is divided into 3 rectangular selection areas that corresponds to the 3 preview cubes. And when the user's foot hovers over an area, the corresponding cube is highlighted in green, and tapping the foot on that area would select the cube. So apart from modality, the other factor that we explored is the timing at which the disambiguation menu appears, which are before interacting with the virtual object, or during interaction, or after the interaction. In the before condition, the menu is shown when the user's hands are hovering near the object, but before pulling the object. The cubes show a static preview of the operations, and the user can select an option before the interaction begins. And once it begins, the menu becomes hidden. For the during condition, the menu is shown after the user has begun pulling on the object. And while the user is interacting, the preview cubes are continuously updated in real time to show the user what is the effect of doing the same action on the other options, and the user can switch between those options. And for the after condition, the menu becomes available after the user has interacted with the object and has released it. And the menu shows the static results of alternative operations that the user can choose from. So we conducted a study where we evaluated the performance of all combinations of modality and timing. But in a pilot study, we found that apart from modality and timing, operation distinguishability could be another important factor that influences the performance. So in the formal experiment, we included 2 sets of operation alternatives. In the high distinguishability set, the operations were highly distinct from one another, and in the low distinguishability set, all the operations looked very similar to each other. And we hypothesized that the selection might be more difficult when the operations looked similar. We recruited 12 participants to do an object shape matching task. So in each trial, a semi-transparent shape is shown, and that shape is the result of applying one of the possible operations on the globe. And the user needs to pull or push the globe and select the correct operation until it matches the transparent shape. And from the results, we see that head gaze had the lowest task completion time, closely followed by speech, and foot tap had the highest task completion time. But most participants reported that they preferred head gaze. In terms of timing, the during condition was significantly faster for completing the task, followed by the after condition and followed by the before condition. For distinguishability, as you might have expected, high distinguishability operations were faster to complete than low distinguishability operations. But what we found really interesting was that there was a significant interaction effect between timing and distinguishability. So for high distinguishability operations, the task completion time was similar across all timings, as we can see here where the orange bars all level around 6 seconds. But for low distinguishability operations, the before condition had a much higher task completion time than during and after. And why is that? So the participants explained that for low distinguishability operations, it was harder to judge which operations they should choose until they actually started doing the gesture. We also collected a raw NASA task load index questionnaire focusing on modality, which gives us a sense of the perceived workload that each modality imposed when doing the object matching task. So the taller bar here indicates more workload. We can see that overall, the speech and gaze had similar workloads, but the foot had comparably more workloads than the other modalities, especially in terms of physical effort and frustration. We also collected several other metrics like selection error and manipulation error counts, the user's subjective ratings and feedbacks. You can find more details about these in the paper. So from the results, we found that the during timing was especially useful for low distinguishability tasks because it was hard to tell which operation is the desired operation until the user is already in the middle of interacting with the object. On the other hand, for high distinguishability tasks, the user can easily tell which operation was the correct one even before starting the task. So although the during timing is preferred by participants overall, the before timing is also a feasible design that we could consider for high distinguishability tasks. Scalability is also important to consider for future work. In this paper, we experimented with only a single gesture on a single virtual object, but in a real application, the user's actions could be part of a larger workflow, and ambiguity could occur at any point in that workflow. Also, we gave participants only 3 operation alternatives to choose from here, but the number of alternatives could also have an effect on the performance. Our study had some limitations. The sample size of 12 is relatively small for a 3-factor experiment, and we tested on a limited scenario where the participants only interacted with a single object. So in the future, it would be important to understand how our results can generalize to resolving ambiguity when there are multiple objects present. To summarize, we presented a system and a set of conditions for disambiguating freehand object interactions in VR. We conducted an analysis of the effect that modality, timing, and distinguishability have on the performance time and error. And we found that overall, the head gaze modality and the during condition achieved the best performance, and they were the most preferred by participants. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you, Laura. So we have a question from Slido. For the after condition, which modality is displayed during the task? Always modality 1 or a random modality?
So for all of the conditions, not just the after condition, we test individual combinations of modality versus timing. So for example, in the after condition, we would test it with the gaze, a gaze plus the after condition, and then test it with speech, and then test it with foot tap and the after condition. So in total, we have a combination of 9 different combinations that we tested.
Okay, we don't have any questions from Slack, and I'm checking that we don't have any questions from also Slido. So I have a question about your work. Did you also look at the number of trials for, especially for the low distinguishability, that the how many times subject tried the select the correct function?
Yes. So, yes. So the number of trial is set for each of these conditions that we tested. We had I remember 6 trials, and then for each and 4 blocks. So sorry, like 4 blocks, and for each block there are 6 trials. So in for each combination we would have 24 trials.
What I want to ask, for example, when the subject or participants want to change the size of the, especially for the low distinguishability, when they manipulate the object, that did you look at how many times they tried to select the correct object shape? Did you look at there was any errors that did they choose other object shapes?
Yes, definitely. So that is part of the, so apart from the task completion time, we measured selection error, which is what you, I think is what you meant, the selection error. Yes. So we also looked at that, and I think we found that all modality distinguishability had a significant effect on the selection error. I think selection error was highest for the foot modality, followed by the result. I don't want to say the wrong information here, but yes, we did test that, and the results can be found in the paper.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And we have a second question from Slido, from Sylvia Pan, University of London. Also, the cognitive load, could it be because there is a higher learning curve for the foot modality? For example, would training reduce cognitive load?
So that's a good question. Actually, for all of these conditions, we gave participants some training block to help them get familiarized with all of these modalities. So learning curve might not be the most important issue here, but foot modality did have some problems in terms of just technical limitations. For example, like it was physically tiring for participants because they had to balance on only one foot, right? And then like it was difficult to select if they're using the right foot, then it was difficult to select the leftmost preview cube with the right foot because there's a balance issue and physical effort issue. So I think those might have resulted in both cognitive and physical workload, more workload for the foot modality.
Okay, thank you very much, Laura, for your presentation.
Thank you.
So this was all of our 5 papers for today for the 2D user interface and manipulation session 9. Thank you for attending this session. That if you are attendee, if you are in IEEE VR, I suggest you to look at the hubs and visit also the sponsored channels. And that is all for today. Thank you very much for attending and watching us online.